with the Biden team and with the Trump team as well. We've got an internal candidate there's been a process for getting a replacement for Karen Pierce when she steps down, I believe.
So, as I think is clear from Lord Case's advice to the Prime Minister,
yes,
revealed in the papers given to the humble address, the last government decided in the first part of 2024 to hold an internal competition for to find a replacement for Dame Karen, and that individual was recommended at the end of that process, but in the end it wasn't taken forward because the general election was called and the appointment process was frozen under the rules that apply on significant decisions during an election period. So it was.
Oh, I see. I didn't realise it was pre-election. Right.
It was before the election.
Okay, cool. So let's go to late summer, early September. What discussions were taking place about an alternative candidate then?
I wasn't involved in any discussions at that point.
Right, and then 2 months later, we have Peter Mandelson announced as ambassador to the United States. Were you? I mean, at what stage were you involved in any discussions?
Yeah, no, good question, Joe. I was first involved when I was in mid-December told of the Prime Minister's decision to make a political appointment as ambassador, and that political appointment was Peter Mandelson. So that was when I was first involved. It was, if I recall right, the 15th of December, so the beginning of the week that ended with his announcement.
Okay, and then from the first tranche of the humble address papers, we've seen that between November the 11th and December the 11th, the Prime Minister's PPS and Private Secretary for the Foreign Office give advice. We see the then Cabinet Secretary, Sir Simon Case, give his advice, and we see the due diligence carried out by the Cabinet Office, but we don't see advice from you. I mean, it may be for members of the public. That seems surprising that you're not, that, you know, were you ever asked your opinion about appointing Peter Mandelson as ambassador? I mean, you were in charge of the Foreign Office.
The first I was aware of the decision was when I was told on the 15th of December. The first I was aware of the advice that had gone to the Prime Minister, or indeed that it was being formulated, was when I read it in the humble address release papers. I wasn't involved. I wasn't told a decision was coming.
Would you have expected to?
I think it is, well, I think two things on it. I think one is, on the face of it, it is reasonable for the head of the Foreign Office to be involved in thinking around what is our major top bilateral ambassador post. On the other hand, given clearly the Prime Minister was deciding to make a political appointment, I think it is also reasonable that civil servants would not be directly involved in discussions around what is a political appointment, because in the end that is a matter for elected politicians, and I can also see the sensitivity. So I'm a bit conflicted. I mean, clearly, I think ideally you want to have a situation where there is a tight and small circle of people who can be consulted on a big decision like this on a basis of trust. But I can also see that in the end it was a political matter, and I suspect, I have no knowledge of this, was discussed in political circles at the top of the government.
In a circle of trust, do you think you'd have a place?
But not in a political conversation, no. But in the end, this is an appointment to the most senior job in our foreign service. I was head of the diplomatic service, so I think it is possible, without asking me as a civil servant or any head of the diplomatic service, I think it is possible for them to be involved in a conversation, for example, around what are the requirements? What does the UK need in the period ahead, and that sort of thing, even if that isn't, you're not then involved in the absolute decision-making discussions around individuals who are politicians, because it's a political appointment.
John.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Can I just follow up one or two of the questions from the Chair? You said that the process had been underway for an internal competition, but come the general election, it was frozen. once the new government had been elected, was the process not then recommenced?
Well, I mean, I wasn't involved, as I said, so I don't know whether that was considered very much. Obviously, you have seen the then Cabinet Secretary's advice on that, and that's all I know about it, is that advice.
The Foreign Office must have been continuing to look at potential candidates to replace Karen Pierce.
The view Karen Pierce had basically been agreed formally, as the notes say, to stay until January 2025. I took the view that actually what made most sense was to know the outcome of both the UK general election, but also the US presidential elections. And obviously there was, until the election was called, there was an uncertainty around the timing of the UK general election, given our political system, with an end point of January 2025. Karen and I had discussed, therefore, whether or not, if required, she'd be willing to stay a bit longer while we were able to see how those two elections played out, as it were. So there was flexibility. So to answer your question, in terms of September of 2024, that was before we knew the outcome of the US elections. The new government was only just in, so the FCDO and I were not actively looking at that point for candidates, because I felt we had time to see the outcome of the US elections, and Karen had shown flexibility over exactly when she ended in the beginning part of 2025.
And when were you first told that it was likely to be a political appointment?
When I was told of the Prime Minister's decision.
15th of December?
Yes.
Until the 15th of December, you had no information that any discussion had taken place, or certainly that a decision had been reached?
No.
And when you were told that a decision had been reached and it was Peter Mandelson, did you express any concerns about that?
I was, as I say, I was told of a decision, so I wasn't asked for advice. I was told a due diligence process had been carried out, and I think this is known now, as the Prime Minister had been made aware of the risks and had accepted those risks and decided to proceed. So I then moved on to a conversation, was asked for advice on the practical steps required to meet what was the Prime Minister's decision, and then the requirement around the timescale.
You say the Prime Minister had been made aware of the risks, but he hadn't, because the developed vetting hadn't been carried out. So all that had taken place was the due diligence. Did you ask whether or not developed vetting had been taken out or had taken place?
It was clear at that point that vetting had not taken place. It was clear to me at that point the step that had taken place was due diligence, not vetting.
Can I just ask you, do you remember who it was that was telling you these things?
I had a conversation with the private secretary in number 10.
And did you express a view as to whether or not developed vetting should take place before an announcement?
Yeah. So on that, later that week, as we were taking forward the practical steps required, the Cabinet Office initially said that as Mandelson was, to use the technical phrase from the guidance, a fit and proper person as a member of the House of Lords, he did not require developed vetting. I mean, to be honest with you, I thought that was odd and insufficient. I'd been Deputy Ambassador in Washington and therefore occasionally chargé, and I knew very well to do the job effectively, you have to be party to some of the deepest secrets that the UK government holds. But I also recognised that the situation was unusual, and I therefore asked for advice, although I was pretty clear in my own mind, from the FCDO security team. They came back to me after discussions with the Cabinet Office and said that their advice was that he should have DV, and I absolutely agreed with that. And by then, the Cabinet Office had reflected further, and they also agreed. And that, if I remember right, that conversation started at the back end of the week of the 16th of December, at the time that the public announcement was made, and then by the beginning of the following week, just before Christmas, it was clear that that was going to be the requirement. That's what I thought, as it were, and I endorsed the advice. And at that point, Mandelson was sent the forms that you need to fill in to kick off the whole process.
I mean, we have had a bit of a he said, she said on this. We've got the Cabinet Office saying that the Foreign Office asked, does he really need DV? And the Cabinet Office saying that the Foreign Office asked, does he really need DV? But you're down on the Foreign Office's side, that it was the Cabinet Office that said it first.
Look, I can't promise you who said what first.
Right.
I know what I was told. I was told the Cabinet Office suggested he didn't require DV. There clearly, self-evidently, was some further back and forth and consideration. And, I don't want to give you an impression that when we were taking forward the DV, there were people in the centre still saying, don't do that. By the beginning of the following week, everyone was agreed that he should have DV, and therefore it was now about taking that process forward. But I've given you my account of my memory of what I heard and what I thought at the time.
One thing is for sure, nobody made a note of it.
In the end, these were about practical arrangements rather than things which, are under, Chair, I know you've talked in previous hearings about civil servants writing everything down, but I also agree with those who said to the committee that actually, if you're going to get work done, you simply cannot and do not have time to record every interaction. The key thing is, what was the decision? The decision was he required DV, and that is recorded.
So the decision was he required DV. That was your view. It was the view of the Foreign Office Security Department. Yet we know that prior to his obtaining DV clearance, he was given access to information which would usually require DV to have been completed. So how did that come about?
So you had I think I can't remember if it's 7 or 8 pages, but it's certainly lengthy and thorough response from the FCDO yesterday. You sent them a very long, not very long, I don't mean that in a critical way, a list of questions. I didn't mean long in a critical way. A list of questions, and they're very good questions. I think there are good answers in the FCDO's response. I recognise them from the consideration of the time. The context I was going to share on this point is you have a publicly announced ambassador designate to do the single most important ambassador job for the UK. You have a very, very compressed timescale you're being asked to meet for them to start their role in Washington. And you have the exceptional circumstances of an incoming Trump administration and a very high premium, therefore, in the new ambassador arriving as well briefed as possible in the short time available, recognising that normally ambassadors have several months to prepare for big jobs like this. And that required Mandelson to have access to briefings and papers to allow him to be properly prepared. And so, as reflected in what the Foreign Office said to you in the note last night, a decision was taken in line with the guidance that he should be given access to the building and access to the paperwork, in particular on, for example, the UK government's preparations and policies towards an incoming administration. And I was given that advice and I endorsed it, and I signed off on it. And I think it was the right thing to do to make sure that, as I say, the Prime Minister's choice for ambassador was properly prepared when he started his job. I think it would be very odd not to do that.
It does look odd, though, because he's got a green pass, which means that he's got DV. And he had a DV pass on the very day that, according to the DV people, he should be recommended to not get DV. So on the day that Ollie Robbins is making his decision that it's borderline, Mandelson is wandering around the Foreign Office with a DV pass. There's a photograph of him going into the Foreign Office on that day.
Yeah, I don't know the answer on the actual type of pass. And it was clear to everybody, and I can't quite remember what the letter from the Foreign Office last night said, was that, and it was, I think, clear at the time, was that he didn't have DV, and there were limits to what he could see and told. And again, I do think this is in the letter last night, but I can't quite remember. I do think there was a process in place to tell people who were going to brief him that there was a certain level of classification they could go up to in talking to him, and they couldn't go beyond that because he didn't have DV clearance.
Can I just one final question? Just coming back to the answer you gave to the chair about your leaving your post. You said it. David Lammy told you that he wanted to make a change because of the transformation program.
Yeah.
Do you believe that your concerns about the way in which Peter Mandelson had been appointed had any influence on the decision to ask you to leave early?
No, for a simple timing reason. I mean, I announced to the department I was leaving on the 4th of November 2024, and I didn't know anything about Mandelson until the middle of December. So the answer is straightforwardly no.
Afri, you wanted to follow up?
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to check with you. I mean, obviously, despite being head of the diplomatic service, you obviously hadn't been asked by number 10 or the Prime Minister directly or indirectly your view on Peter Mandelson's suitability for the role. Had you been, would you have wanted to raise, or would you have said you had concerns about the reputational risks that he carried?
You know, I think that is genuinely a really hard question to answer, because hindsight is a fantastically wonderful thing, and it is hypothetical. But let me have a go at what I was thinking at the time. I mean, firstly, it's just worth repeating. At no point did anyone consult me, ask me. I was presented with a decision. There was no space, and told to get on with it. There was no space for dialogue. You know that. I think, look, it is the most important job we have. I had been deputy ambassador. I knew the US well from 10 years previously, and obviously worked a lot in the United States throughout my diplomatic career. So I think I had a sense and an understanding of US politics, which gave me an idea of what might or might not be a problem further down the track. And so I had a concern at the time. There was a part of me that had a concern at the time that I didn't know anything that wasn't in the public domain. Obviously, we know now a lot more about Mandelson's links to Epstein, but I had a concern that a man who, demonstrably from the public record at the time, and it's clearly much bigger than we all knew, had a link to Epstein, and that Epstein, through both the presidential election campaign in the US and more generally in US politics, had been and was a controversial figure. And I was worried that this could become a problem in future, not because I was expecting that we were going to find out more, because to be honest, I wasn't, and who would necessarily know, but much more, I just thought that it was a potentially difficult issue politically in the United States. So that is a very candid account of probably what I was thinking. Yeah. Thinking at the time, but there was no space or avenue or mechanism for me to put that on the table. A decision had been taken, and it was a political decision.
I mean, you mentioned, of course, the links to Jeffrey Epstein, which were in the media at the time. Did you have concerns about Mandelson's business relationships with China or Russia?
So please don't laugh, but I really didn't actually follow what Mandelson was up to in his business relationships. I kind of knew about him when he was a government minister, so I didn't sort of have it right in front of my face, and I didn't see the due diligence report. What the details of those were. What I would always believe in is a vetting process to look at issues which might affect national security.
And obviously you know the United States very well. Your previous diplomatic role there, you probably had links with people who are out there. Were you aware of any views that were expressed by the President's transitional team about concerns about Mandelson being given that post, or about Dame Karen Pierce being moved on from the post?
Well, I think there's quite a lot already in the public domain. There was, at least one tweet from someone close to Trump, reminding people of what Mandelson had said about Trump many years before when he was president. Previously, I think those around Trump felt blindsided by the announcement at short notice, shall we say. And it was clear also that Karen and her team had done an excellent job in establishing relationships and access to President-elect Trump, and also when he was a candidate, doing their jobs. That's a hard thing to do, particularly in the political climate in the US, while maintaining good relations with the current administration. And Trump, again, on the record, had said that he'd like Karen and work well with her and be happy for her to stay. So that's a rather long-winded way of saying yes.
Thank you.
Can I just on what you were saying earlier about the DV and the access point? It's just to be fair on you, it is page 5 of the,
Thank you very much,
the
Chair.
statement
I
from
appreciate your help.
Pollard, paragraph. It's paragraph 5, and it's where I believe that it says Lord Mandelson's private secretary should, in advance, inform people that he was meeting that they knew he did not yet have DV clearance.
Thank you.
Okay. Richard.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sir Philip, for returning to the Foreign Affairs Committee to give evidence. The Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, was reflecting last September on the discussions that were had in government the year before about Lord Mandelson's appointment, and he reflected that that you, Sir Philip, had reservations. Can you remember what you were saying to the National Security Advisor about your reservations around appointing Lord Mandelson back in 2024?
I think it was very much along the lines of what I've just said around the possibility of his known connection to Epstein causing an issue subsequently. Obviously, I didn't know what was actually going to happen because Epstein was such a toxic hot potato subject in US politics itself, including in the election campaign. So that is what I recall thinking at the time, and I can't prove this because I don't know what Jonathan was thinking when he said it last September, but my instinct is that's what it refers to.
Okay. And then thinking later on that year about the Number 10 operation, do you recall any dismissiveness in Number 10 about the importance of vetting, and if so, how was that communicated to you?
I wouldn't use the word dismissive. The word I would use is uninterested. I think people wanted to know all the practical steps required for Mandelson to arrive in Washington on or around, but by or around the inauguration date needed to be completed, at pace, as it were, and that was it. The interest. I mean, no one, to be honest with you, no one said to me, "Look, Philip, the Prime Minister knows there's some risks around this. Can you really make sure that the vetting's done rigorously?" I mean, it's always rigorous anyway, but that wasn't the sort of thing being communicated. The sort of thing was, fine, he needs vetting, make sure it's done in time.
Okay, thank you. Last week, when Sir Ollie gave evidence to the committee, I said that Sam Coates had reported words around "just to prove it." And I need to correct the record slightly because Sam Coates didn't actually report that. He didn't file a report. He did discuss it with a member of this committee. He didn't actually put it in writing. It didn't get off the cutting room floor. But it doesn't take away from the fact that his reply made plain that he had a strong sense that there was an atmosphere of pressure and a certain dismissiveness about this developed vetting. Could you comment on that atmosphere of pressure as you understood it in late 2024?
Can I just say one thing about the non-reported phone call and use of a particular word? I think it's important. I say this. Look, firstly, I didn't receive any direct calls from the Chief of Staff during my time as Permanent Undersecretary, so there was no call at all. So my interactions with him were always when others were present in a general meeting. There weren't very many of those either. This story or versions of it has been in the media persistently or floating around the media since last September. There's different versions, sometimes involving the swear word, sometimes not, and I've really racked my brains, and I cannot recall Morgan McSweeney swearing in a meeting at me, or indeed just in general. And so I don't see any substance in that part of it. And I think it's important I say that this morning, given how many people have come to think that might be true. In not answering your question, I've slightly forgotten what your actual question was. I know I didn't answer it. I did that on purpose. But can you just the headline at the end of your question? Sorry.
Ollie, when replying last week, said that there was an atmosphere of pressure and a certain dismissiveness about this DV process. And I wondered if you could comment on the atmosphere of pressure, please.
I think, where I would start is, on the 18th of December, I received a letter from the Principal Private Secretary to the Prime Minister, and it's the one released as part of the humble address. I don't receive letters from the Principal Private Secretary to the Prime Minister very often. Most of my dealings was with the Foreign Affairs team in the number 10, as you'd expect. And the letter, as you know, basically says Prime Minister has decided. And it then goes on to say, please could arrangements be put in place, words to that effect, for a handover by the inauguration, a very compressed timescale. And that, in effect, is the top of the government saying the Prime Minister has decided he wants Mandelson's ambassador, and he wants it done in that timescale. So that is what creates the pressure. There were conversations around progress, but I think no one in the FCDO working on this can have been any doubt of the urgency of the issue and the importance that number 10 and the Prime Minister attached to Mandelson being in DC in very short order.
Can I help you? On page
Yes.
22 of the bundle that's in front of you, the letter is there.
Yeah, no, I've got, thanks, Joe. I've got the letter. I mean, it's clear. I mean, it's clear. Please would you take forward the necessary arrangements at pace? We would like to secure Agrimor as soon as possible, the formal agreement of the US government, as it were.
Read the end of the sentence.
As soon as possible to enable a handover in advance of the US inauguration.
In advance of the US
at that point,
inauguration.
that was the ambition at the start.
He's given the job on the 20th of December, and they want him at the US inauguration on the 20th of January.
Correct.
So you have a month.
Yes. Sorry, does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. And I have another, and it relates to that time in December. And I just wanted to sort of try and get an idea for some of the events that were happening in December of 2024. The Prime Minister gave a speech on the 5th of December where he talked about the tepid bath. And just to recap for people not familiar with it, he said that people in Whitehall are comfortable in the tepid bath of managed decline. The implication was that the civil service was satisfied to stagnate and was not sufficiently reactive to political direction. I wonder whether that had any influence on the culture and the way in which the civil service was reacting to pressure around this political appointment.
I honestly don't think it did, actually. I honestly think the FCDO, once it was clear a decision had been taken and had been through the formal sign-off process with His Majesty the King, did what it always does, leant in and did its level best to deliver ministers' ambitions, in this case, the Prime Minister's ambition. I think that would have done that whether or not the Prime Minister had made a speech about the civil service earlier in the month. To be honest with you, I think that's, actually think the Foreign Office and all the officials involved in the Cabinet Office and number 10 as well, and they all acted, in my view, certainly the ones I was collaborating with, in good faith at the time to try and deliver a very, very ambitious ask in terms of the timescale, because that was what the professional thing to do.
One more, Chair, if I may. The Prime Minister said at PMQs last week that, quote, no pressure existed whatsoever in relation to this case. How can that be squared with Sir Ollie's evidence last week, where he said that there was a strong sense that there was an atmosphere of pressure?
I don't think it's for me to do evidence squaring, and obviously there's going to be other conversations around this, and you know, I don't know who may or may not be asked to consider it in more detail. I'd have to ask you, what do you actually mean by your question? And the reason I asked you that, I'm not being difficult, because I think there's two possible questions here. Question one is, was there pressure on the substance of the DV case? Question two is, was there pressure to get the DV case done in a particular time frame? And they are different time frames. Sorry, they are different questions. And I worry.
You get us two answers.
I can give you two answers. I actually wrote down two answers,
Good.
Chair, because I think there are two questions there. And I do think some of the problem with them is people are talking past each other because they're actually talking about different things. But anyway, I can't find my answers, but I'll give them to you anyway. So shall I just carry on, or do you want to ask?
No, carry on.
So
Well,
answer one is, during my tenure, I was not aware of any pressure on the substance of the Mandelson DV case. Question two, was there pressure? Absolutely. And I've described it, and I also have seen what the Foreign Office said to you last night, and recognise what is said in that letter about the pressure to get it done, i.e. DV clearance, by a particular timescale. Because as I said to you earlier, I don't think anyone could have been any doubt in the department working on this that there was pressure to get everything done as quickly as possible.
And I recognise your distinction between time pressure and pressure on the substance of the vetting process. But I think it's reasonable to suppose that one can affect the other. If there is time pressure, if there's a desire to get the ambassador out to Washington, DC before inauguration, then you can understand that the FCDO has the delegated power to give a recommendation around developed vetting, might also then lean on the substance as well as the timing.
So if I recall right, Sir Ollie, when he was giving evidence to you last week, said that there was pressure on the timescale, but that did not affect his decision-making on the substance of the case. And the letter from the FCDO last night says he, i.e. the Director ESND, does not assess that this pressure, the general pressure, influenced the professional judgment that was reached by himself or his team. And to be clear, I believe both of them.
Even though they didn't manage to read the last page.
Of what?
There was a 10-page document of the DV, and neither of them seemed to have read it. Was that anything to do with the time pressure or any
Chair,
other pressure?
I'm not aware of details of
The
bits of paper.
boxes.
Yeah, well, I'm not aware of the boxes. I've not seen a piece of paper with boxes on it either ever in my career. So, you know,
Nobody seems to have seen them. Right, thank you. Afra, you've got one question, and then I'm moving on to Abdesam.
Just wanted to ask, given this tight time frame that there was, we're also aware that back in September of 2024, Lord Simon Case had written to the Prime Minister advising that security vetting should be carried out prior to the appointment of Peter Mandelson. But we know that the announcement, I think, was made on the 20th of December 2024, and it wasn't until 3 days later, as we've talked about, that security vetting commenced. So what would you say was the process in place at the time for the order of security vetting and appointment announcement, in your view?
sorry, can you just unpack slightly what you mean?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
What would you say would be the normal order of process in place at the time? Would you say that the normal order would be vetting and then announcement?
Yes.
Or announcement and then vetting?
No, the normal order is vetting and then announcement.
Thank you.
Do you have any idea why it went the other way around?
No, the timing of the announcement was driven and decided by number 10.
Okay, thank you. Abdesam.
Thank you, Chair. So just following on from colleagues' questions in relation to pressure, what did that look like? I mean, were you receiving regular phone calls?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's important to, I'm not going to repeat myself, but it's important to remember the overall framing in a sense. You know, you have the letter from the Principal Private Secretary. I won't repeat myself, but that provides the overall context. There were meetings in that week with Number 10. There would have then have been regular progress chasing. There was discussion around the exact timetable that went on, and so there was, keen interest all the way through from Number 10 that the practical arrangements required to get Mandelson to Washington in the timescale required or thereabouts was all moving forward. But in a sense, the pressure was kind of set at the beginning and just carried on. It wasn't a matter of did someone phone every day at 10 o'clock. It was much more, this ambitious timetable has been set.
You referenced earlier Cabinet Office's fit and proper exemption, and you said that you thought this was odd and insufficient and unusual. Did you reference your concerns to Number 10 or to the Cabinet Office?
I didn't need to be honest with you, because what I did was I asked the FCDO security team for advice, and then when the advice came back to me after their conversations with the Cabinet Office, at that point everyone was agreed that he needed DV.
There were a number of emails that came out in the humble address prior to Mandelson being appointed. Was it normal for Number 10 to be sending emails to prospective candidates?
No, I think, to be honest, I would cite, there's, for example, if I remember right, and I can check if you want, Chair, but if I remember right, one of the emails attached conflict of interest forms, which would normally be a departmental matter, and it was in the end agreed that the conflict of interest should be done by the FCDO. I think the fact that Number 10 was at all points trying to accelerate arrangements was a strong signal of the time pressure that everyone was under. They were also trying to play their part. They were, stepping in to do things which might in the past have been left to the FCDO.
Mm-hmm. And in one of the emails, it references that you had a discussion with Mandelson. What was that discussion?
From memory, I had a intro chat with Mandelson on the Friday, the day that his appointment was announced, and that was around practical matters of how the department would support him in his preparations to be the next ambassador now that had been announced.
Okay. And in one of the emails, it references that an iPad, laptop, iPhone was given to Mandelson. Is that usual practice to give to somebody who is not yet cleared?
It's not usual, but it's not unprecedented.
Okay, and the emails also referenced that he'd had briefings from senior officials at the FCDO. Were you aware of the content of those briefings?
I didn't, because obviously I wouldn't have had time. I wasn't aware of the precise every bit of it, but I was aware of the subjects that we were choosing to brief him on, and there was a kind of what you'd expect, a proper professional process run by the team in charge of our relationship with the United States to give him access, particularly to briefing on US government policy towards the incoming administration across a range of issues. And I remember seeing the list of issues, and I probably looked at it and thought, yes, that looks like a sensible list. But I didn't look myself at the briefing. I wouldn't have had or expect to do that.
In none of the emails, it makes reference to him being subject to cleared vetting. So it's almost as though he's got the job and we're just going through the process. Was there anything in any of the documents that said this is all subject to satisfactory DV?
As far as I recall and am aware, the first time the documentation shows subject to DV is when the FCDO sent him what is a standard form of words for people who are going into jobs. I'm not aware of any other references in the documentation.
I mean, would it be right to assume that had the final clearance been, would you foresee a situation where the final DV had been refused? that would have been rejected by the Cabinet Office? I mean, I can't foresee a situation where that would have happened, given how he was treated, and all the emails have implied that he has the job. Would you have foreseen a situation where it could have been refused?
Sorry, I'm not sure. What do you mean by that? Do you mean, is it a possibility, or do you mean?
Could it have been a possibility?
Well, I think, you start a vetting process. There has to be a possibility that at the end of that process, someone is deemed not to meet the standards to have, developed national security vetting.
Might have happened in this situation.
I mean, I don't know anything about the substance of the vettings. I really, I don't. I'm, sorry to say this again, a bit repeating what I said earlier. I at the time followed very much about Mandelson's wider life. I mean, it's not an impossibility. I mean, it would have been a crisis if we got to the point where he had no vetting clearance. That would have been a crisis. Self-evidently, a publicly announced political appointment as the next ambassador to Washington, not being able to go, that would have been a big problem.
But I mean, presumably the DV is done with an open mind. And it's done with an open mind whether we're going to do DV, and if you fail it, you're not going to get the job. And so I think, the question is that there's an email which says that he's going to get briefed in person from the 6th of January onwards, including on higher tiers. Presumably that means equivalent of the sort of information you get if you got DV. He's got a pass for people who've got DV. This is before he gets DV. He's on the payroll from the 14th of January. I mean, it does all look like he's got the job already.
He got the job in the sense that he'd been announced by Number 10. The paperwork had gone to His Majesty the King. He'd been announced by Number 10. We were seeking the agreement of the US government. So in that sense, he had got the job.
What's the point in the DV?
Because to do the job of, as I said, sorry, I should take the irritation out of it. I'm not irritated, but because to do the job effectively, you have to be able to have access to information that is of its sensitivity requires DV. So that's why he needed DV.
If he'd been failed, he would have had access to the buildings as if he had DV. He would have had access to information as if he'd had DV, and he would have failed it because he would have been seen as a security risk. And you would have exposed yourselves to him as a security risk during the period.
I don't agree that with your kind of characterization of as though he had DV. He had access to the building, but parts of the building where people without DV also have access. He did not have access.
Why did he have a green pass?
He did not. I don't, John. So you'll have to ask the Foreign Office about the passes. He did not have access to the parts of the building where you absolutely do require DV. And on the paperwork, and I think this is in the Foreign Office letter, he had access under the rules as allowed as a fit and proper person and a member of the House of Lords. He had access to papers up to a certain level of classification. He didn't have general access. He wasn't able to roam free, if you like, in terms of access to information across the department. So I can understand why it looks odd. I actually think it was the right thing to do to ensure at the time that in the short time scale that had been given, he could arrive in Washington properly prepared. The alternative would have been that we would have had an ambassador to the United States turning up not properly or fully briefed on the government's policies towards an incoming administration, and that would not have been right. It wouldn't have been proper for the Foreign Office to operate in that way. So I'm comfortable that it was the right decision at that point in time to give him that limited access under the rules.
So is this a fair way of putting it? That given that he'd been offered the job on the 20th of December, and you've got Christmas and New Year in the way, and he's got to be getting to Washington by the 20th of January, you were doing everything that you could to accommodate him being ready for that date?
Within the rules.
Was there a contingency plan in place for what might happen if he wasn't granted security clearance?
No.
Not done.
Edward.
Sorry,
Edward.
Edward.
Thank you, Chair. Sir Philip, you said that you were informed by the Principal Private Secretary in number 10 on the 15th,
18th.
on the 18th.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I know the word principal. But I was informed by our private secretary number 10 on the 15th.
On the 15th,
Yes.
that the Prime Minister wanted
Yes.
to appoint Peter Mandelson.
Yes.
Was that a conversation? Because there's obviously then subsequently the letter.
Yeah, I was phoned up.
Your phone. The letter just references the desire to appoint Peter Mandelson. Your letter to the Private Secretary,
Yeah.
to the King,
Yeah.
says that the Prime Minister has indicated his intention to recommend a small number of political appointments. So when you had the conversation on the 15th, that presumably was that the PM will make a number of appointments.
To be honest, I can't recall. I don't think he did. I think, to be honest with you, I think that letter, the first sentence of my letter, that was a catch-all sentence, which I think was the way it was described to your colleague in your hearing with Cat Little. It was non-specific. It was a non-specific general catch-all rather than because I was being told there's more coming.
Well, so obviously in his evidence, Sir Ollie Robbins said that he was asked, or another name was floated to him, Matthew Doyle, and not only that, he was asked to keep that information from the Foreign Secretary. If not during the conversation on the 15th, at any subsequent point were any other names floated to you for potential political appointees?
Not by the Labour government. And the first I knew about Matthew Doyle's when Sir Ollie gave you evidence.
And in any conversations with number 10, were you ever asked to withhold information from the Foreign Secretary?
Ever?
Well, okay, so with the current administration, we should put on record, you have served under 4 different prime ministers. So let's establish at any point during your tenure as Permsec, were you asked by a number 10 organisation to withhold information from the Foreign Secretary? How usual is that for that request?
I mean, I'm worried that everyone's going to think that the centre of government spends its whole time sort of conniving behind the backs of everyone else in government, and that's not the reality. The reality is, people trying to get on with delivering the business of the government. The vast majority of the time. I think my best answer to that question is unusual, but in the end, and I'd say it's particularly around things where you might have a policy disagreement or difference of view between the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State. It is not unheard of for permanent secretaries, in a sense, to try and work in a way which allows there to be a decision and a consensus view, and the government can then move ahead and take it forward. And in that sort of situation, it's not unheard of for a permanent secretary to be privy to something that they don't pass on to, or are asked not to, rather, pass on to their Secretary of State. So I would describe it as not unheard of, but I don't want to give the impression that this is kind of standard operating procedure.
This is extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. So the Foreign Secretary, so the Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office can be told, don't tell your boss about this when they are the Foreign Secretary. Is it, has that ever happened to you before this?
Yes, it has.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, you learn something new every day.
I suppose it begs the question, does that operate in the other way? Because a lot of this seems to come down to what the Prime Minister was told and when. So how frequently are people being asked to withhold information from the Prime Minister? Has that happened as well?
I can't speak for number 10 or the Prime Minister. I would never say to number 10, you can't tell the Prime Minister. And I always work on the assumption if I'm speaking to number 10, there's a possibility, and that's for them to judge, that the information I'm relaying to number 10 might go to the Prime Minister.
Because much of this does seem to hinge on how much the Prime Minister knew when he was making a decision to appoint Peter Mandelson, and the briefing that he may or may not got. So I
can't help you with that because I wasn't involved.
I appreciate that. You said that you weren't involved in the decision-making process around Peter Mandelson because it was a political appointment. Was the Foreign Secretary involved in the decision-making?
I don't know.
Okay. I mentioned already you served under 4 prime ministers. search through the records, and you can correct me on this, suggest that the only other political appointment that happened during your tenure as Perm Sec was Sir George Hollenberry, who was the former Member of Parliament for Meon Valley and was appointed ambassador to Cuba during the Johnson administration. Comparing those two processes and the timelines, how markedly different was the Mandelson appointment compared with the process that was taken out for the appointment of Sir George Hollenberry?
You might need to get chapter and verse on this from the FCDO. During my tenure, the only two serving political appointees were Lord Llewellyn, Paris, then Rome, and you're quite right, Sir George Hollenberry in Cuba. I can't absolutely promise you, because I started in September 2020 at the height of COVID and had to lead a complex merger. But from memory, George Hollenberry's appointment was done before I started, even if he didn't take up post until after I started. But certainly I wasn't involved in doing anything around his appointment. I think it was already on the, so I think it was already certainly decided, even if it hadn't been announced, and then it was taken forward in what I would describe as the normal way for an ambassadorial appointment, with time to go through the steps in the normal sequence, if that answers your question.
It does, thank you. More broadly, in terms of the process then, you've already mentioned that you have never seen the now infamous traffic light boxes. Apparently, according to the letter we received last night, the departmental head of security had also never seen the traffic light boxes, wasn't aware that it was. So Ollie has talked us through the fact that he had a meeting with the head of security. Have you ever had a meeting with the head of security to discuss whether or not somebody should be cleared DV in your time as PEMSEC?
No, I don't recall a recommendation from UKSV ever being escalated to me during my tenure.
That was unique. Given that you had never had cause to see the traffic light system, should we read anything into the fact that Sir Ollie, when he had that meeting, was not shown it?
I would rest on what you were told in the FCDO's letter last night.
I just pick up on one point.
At one point and then it went.
So in the letter last night, it says this is unusual where there's a difference between UKSV recommendation and FCDO sign off, but it says there's more than one a month. So
sorry, the door opened. I misheard the last end of the
letter last night says that it's unusual, but not exceptional, for UKSV recommendations to differ to the final FCDO decision on vetting. But it says there's more than one a month of those cases. But you're saying that they're not raised to Permanent Secretary level.
correct.
Who would then make that decision?
I think that's set out in the letter. If I remember right, it sets out the decision-making hierarchy, but you would have to get chapter and verse from the department.
Thank you, Chair. If you'd become aware, Sir Philip, that there were issues with UKSV, given how high profile this appointment is, would you have raised this with the Foreign Secretary?
I genuinely don't think that's a question I can answer, because I don't know anything about the substance of the concerns. So, and what I would say to you is that, you know, when you're a permanent secretary, you have what I describe as crucible moments, and you are basically being asked to decide something sensitive, sometimes under time pressure, and you can't discuss that with anybody. And I really don't think that I can second guess somebody's decision in those circumstances when I'm not in them and don't have the information and the environment of that time.
I understand, but Philip, you've said that it's very unusual for security matters to be raised, and certainly in your time that had never happened. given how unusual it was and given the media spotlight on this already very controversial decision to appoint Peter Mandelson, and looking at that Civil Service Code of Conduct, there's an expectation for ministers to be briefed properly by the civil service. Would you have exercised your judgment to say, actually, this is one of those times I perhaps need a conversation with the Foreign Secretary?
Yeah, I can't, genuinely, I'm not being difficult. I genuinely can't answer that question in the abstract without having the briefing, knowing the information, knowing where, I can't tell you what I would have done. I just actually don't know.
Understand. Do you recall your conversation with Sir Ollie regarding the handover of this decision? And in that conversation, did you discuss any of the pressures, whether that be time pressure or the kind of political pressure?
Yeah, I'm sure that I gave that we had about a week, but he spent a certain amount of that time talking to other people and reading documents, and we had a conversation at the beginning of the week, and at the end of the week we had a longish meeting where I kind of went through some of the senior personnel issues, talked about some of the future appointments that are coming up, and how he might want to think about that, and what you'd expect in a professional handover, and kind of some of the things that I knew or wanted him to know that perhaps weren't. I was probably the best placed person to actually tell him all of that, and so I did, as part of that, describe to him in headline terms the process that had been through and where we got to in the appointment of Mandelson and the preparations for him to arrive in Washington.
And as part of that process, did you raise any concerns that you had personally about this, or any of your risks that you thought may arise as a result of it?
My memory is we had a general conversation mostly about what had happened, where they got to. The one thing I do remember discussing and agreeing with Ollie is how we would handle the conflict of interest form. I'd seen a draft of it and had commented on it, but it was, and Ollie and I agreed this, it was, I felt and he felt, something that wasn't sensible for me to sign off in my final week, not least because he was going to have to justify whatever anything was in there. So I do remember a conversation around how best to handle the conflict of interest in the transition from me to him.
Understood. In your earlier answers, you spoke to the chair about the pressure to get the ambassador in post before the inauguration, and Christmas and other time pressures notwithstanding, that's why you did the process as you did. Would you have briefed anyone else who is considered for that post if they weren't a political appointment? Let's say it was not Peter Mandelson and it wasn't a political appointment, but you knew this was the most likely candidate. Do you think that same thing would have happened?
Yes.
Okay. And on this announcement, you said that the normal order was the vetting to happen first and the announcement second, but obviously you say it's number 10's decision for it to have gone in this order. Did you know that that was going to happen? Were you aware that it was being announced?
When did I know it was going to be announced? I think probably by the end of the 18th of December, certainly by the morning of the 9th, on the 9th, either the end of the 18th or beginning of the Thursday, I knew number 10 were going to announce the following day.
And did you warn of any risks of proceeding this way? Did you speak to either the Foreign Secretary or anyone in number 10 or anyone else in the department?
Well, the die was cast, to be honest. So I think we had a discussion around practicalities.
There wasn't any intervention from you as...
In what regard?
That there are risks of proceeding this way, that the normal process is the vetting happens first and the announcement second. And by going ahead with this timeline, that's not the normal process. And at number 10 and the Foreign Office could be open to criticism and or process.
I mean, to be honest, I think that, as I say, the die was cast, the Prime Minister had decided, the timetable was set, number 10 wanted to announce.
Thank you.
I still don't understand this, because if the die was so set that you weren't in a position to say, I don't think this is a good idea, I think you should do DV first before the announcement, and yet you say it still wouldn't have been a problem if he'd failed his DV, we would have announced that.
I think the difference is if there'd been, I'm talking in the generic here, obviously, because I don't know anything about the substance, but generically, if there'd been sufficient material, in any case, you've got, you're talking about the beginning of the process and the end of the process. Talking about, beginning of the process, one thing. End of the process is a different thing because you've got a body of material.
And who have I got next? Oh, sorry. And I've got Alan for one question, and then I've got Fleur.
Thank you, Chair. Sir Philip, I should put on record that you and I worked briefly together when you were High Commissioner to India, and I was Her Majesty's then Trade Commissioner, a job for which I had to get DV.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. The issue we're struggling with in part is judgment, and one of the main problems is that initial judgment to appoint Peter Mandelson was flawed. Some are trying to say that the FCDO process, the vetting process, could have corrected that flawed initial decision. But is it fair to say that when you look at Ian Collard's response, politicians inserted enormous risk into the system by appointing Peter Mandelson, and what Ollie Robbins and the FCDO did was use their processes legitimately to manage that risk? Or do you think they were outside of that standard FCDO process?
I don't know anything about the substance, and I have no view, therefore, on judgments arraigned around the substance. I do think what they did, as I understand it, was within the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much, Sir Philip, for coming to give us evidence today. I've got some questions about the due diligence part of the process. Were there any other FCDO appointments like this when you were told about the due diligence and it was an FCDO appointment after the due diligence had been done?
I'm not aware for ambassador jobs of any due diligence being done of this sort of form. It's not part of the normal civil service process. So I don't recognise it.
In your experience, have you had experience of people not passing due diligence? So is it a process which is a pass or fail then?
It's not a process. It's not a standard process. I mean, the closest I can come to is, for example, this may be a total red herring, so if you want me to stop, I'll stop. But recruitment for non-executive directors of departments, but obviously outsiders, because that's the point. They have in the past been subject to a look at their social media profile and that sort of thing to see whether that throws up anything which make them unsuitable for a non-executive role in the government department. But I mean, it's a bit different, but that is the closest comparative in terms of appointment processes to full-time on the books jobs rather than a non-executive role. I'm certainly in the FCDO. It's not part of the process, and certainly not for ambassador jobs.
And so just a bit more on the process. So you were told about it on a phone call on the 15th of December, but you weren't given the due diligence checklist, which I've got in front of us. It's part of the humble address papers that had already been completed. Did you see the conflict of interest paper at that time?
No, because it wasn't completed. It was basically sent to Mandelson, if I remember right, the following week or the week after. Let me just check to make sure I give you the right date on the conflict of interest. I saw that over the weekend of, I think it was the 4th and 5th of January, and I had some points on it. Either, I didn't, further points I wanted addressed, and so I remember actually writing an email because it was a Sunday. I wrote an email setting out those points.
Who did you write the email to?
My office. Someone in the department dealing with it.
Okay, and were they? So they were the concerns which would have been raised by the due diligence form about the different things we can see here. Epstein, for example, was in that.
I think I can't speak to due diligence. I wasn't involved. On the conflict of interest forms, a clear form, which you fill out, setting out areas in which in your life that might create a conflict, and then there's a process with the line manager, and the ambassador to Washington is managed by the permanent secretary to agree whether that conflict's surmountable or not, and if mitigations and so on.
And is there a precedent of you seeing a due diligence form? Do you think or for asking? I know this is an unusual appointment because the Cabinet Office did the due diligence, so you didn't see it. Could you have asked for the FCDO to also do due diligence, seeing that you were going to be Peter Mandelson's line manager, and so that you were directly responsible in that way?
Yeah, if I remember right, I think I asked to see it and was told it formed advice to the Prime Minister, and therefore wasn't something I could see. Look, I think what you're suggesting is that, I've been told the Prime Minister had due diligence done, he's seen it, decided this, and I'm going to say, well, that's not good enough for me, I'm going to do my own due diligence. I don't think that's plausible. Obviously, there was the pre-existing conflict of interest process and national security vetting processes which were gone through.
Just to be clear, in that week, I think you've been asked before about did you raise this with the Foreign Secretary? So this week of the 15th, you were told, the 18th it became public. Did you have a conversation with the Foreign Secretary during that week to say, this is the most high-profile appointment. It's a very controversial appointment. It seems.
I was clear in my own mind that I needed to know the Foreign Secretary was content before I went to His Majesty the King to seek his agreement. Diplomatic service appointment, ambassador, ultimately, obviously Prime Minister involved as well, but responsible to the Foreign Secretary. If I remember right, the Monday was the day of the annual Australia-UK ministerial meeting, which both the Foreign Secretary and I, pretty busy, both in our own rights. My counterpart was here as well as Penny Wong, but also together in joint meetings for much of the day. My memory is that I had a brief word in the margins of that to relay to the Foreign Secretary what I had been told. And if I remember right, he said he would talk to number 10.
Okay. So you were told by phone call, then you were in the same meeting together, and then you said, I've been told that this is going to happen, and the Foreign Secretary said he would have words with number 10 after that. And then did you hear anything back from that?
I didn't say he would have words, which obviously can be read differently.
No, let's make this very clear.
He said he would talk to.
You would talk to number 10 about that. And did you hear back from that before it was then you wrote that letter to say he was appointed?
So yes, so I had the letter from the Principal Private Secretary of Foreign Affairs on the morning of the Wednesday the 18th. I established the Foreign Secretary was content for me to take forward the process, and I then wrote to Sir Clive, and the letter's part of the release, as you know.
Is there any record of that meeting where you had an establishment of the Foreign Secretary?
He was travelling, and I had a exchange with someone in the travelling party and had a message back. He was content for me to write. He was on his way, I think, to a dinner of NATO foreign ministers.
Can I just follow up on this? So you've said that there was, the purpose of due diligence is to look at reputational risks, yeah? And so if I was Foreign Secretary and one of my ambassadors had gone rogue, it would be for me to be answerable for that, right? So surely it's important in those circumstances for me to see the due diligence.
I don't know the extent to which the Foreign Secretary was involved prior to the Prime Minister's decision.
I don't understand what that answer is. You said that you'd asked to see the due diligence and you were told that it was something for the Prime Minister, and now you've given whatever answer that is.
Sorry, Chair, would you mind repeating the question? Would you just repeat the question?
Did the Foreign Secretary see the due diligence or not before you tell the King, I've discussed this with the Foreign Secretary who agrees with the recommendation?
I'm not aware that he saw it.
Are you aware that the Deputy Prime Minister has now said that there were worries about Peter Mandelson's appointment at the time? And he said to LBC that there was a discussion within government, but that ultimately it was a matter for number 10.
I saw the media report at the time.
Is that all you're going to tell me?
Honestly, I'm not being difficult. If you ask me a question, I will answer it. But I should also say I'm obviously not here to speak for the Foreign Secretary. You kindly pointed out at the beginning, I'm not a civil servant anymore.
Have a view on the accuracy of the statement.
Just read it again. To us. I think you should ask the Foreign. If you want to know the Foreign Secretary's views, I don't really
Yeah,
feel.
but you
I
were
should
there
speak
in the
for
middle
you.
of all of this, right? You were there in the middle of all
Okay,
of this.
let me-
The Foreign Secretary
right.
is your boss.
Fair enough.
You know, the Foreign Secretary, you're telling us that the Foreign Secretary was happy and you told the King that. The Foreign Secretary, now the former Foreign Secretary, now the Deputy Prime Minister, is saying actually that there were concerns and there were discussions going on, you know, which is true.
So, got it. So I'm not being unhelpful, I promise you. Let me put it this way. I was asked what the Foreign Secretary said when I told him. He did not say, Philip, please crack on, write to the King. He actually said, I'm going to talk to number 10.
That's it.
That's that, because we were in the margins of a big important at the top of the Australian foreign and security system in what is always a very pressurised period in the run up to Christmas, and this was about a political appointment. He was my political boss as Foreign Secretary. I gave him the information I'd been told. He said he would talk to number 10.
Cool.
Follow up to that, Sir Philip. So yesterday, the former Foreign Secretary, now Deputy Prime Minister, said, as the chair said, that he'd expressed worries, and you said this was a conversation in the margins. But again, back to how serious an appointment this is, and the level of media scrutiny already rightly on this appointment. Did you have any further conversations with the then Foreign Secretary about these worries?
As I recall, he and I had a brief conversation. I can't remember if it was the 18th or the 17th or the 18th, so the Tuesday or the Wednesday. It was inconclusive, so he wasn't at that point saying he was content for me to proceed, and I hadn't in any case received what I asked for at the outset. I said at the outset to number 10, I'm not doing anything until I've got something in writing. And at the point of that conversation, I hadn't received a letter from the Principal Private Secretary, and so we had an inconclusive conversation.
Did you raise any of your concerns with him for him to make a judgment to pass this on, or anything like that? Was there any conversation about the worries that you both seem to have had?
I think the Foreign Secretary should speak for himself on his views and what was said, as it were. I at that point was doing my best to resolve the situation, establish what I was being asked to do by the top of the government, and then take the bureaucratic steps necessary either way.
So it was a situation that needed to be resolved during that week. Do you think the process of that week, the due diligence part of this, is evidence of, and the timings of it, is evidence of pressure or undue pressure, or evidence of due process being followed?
I'm really sorry, but I'm not sure I follow you.
The fact that, I mean, it's very, by your own admission, it's very unusual, and it was an unusual appointment of a political appointment. So it was this whole process tested the system to the limit, really, and we're looking at how the system worked in this case, but also what we need to learn for the future. But just the evidence of, you were already told quite late on in the process, due diligence had been done, then you were told he was going to be appointed, and then it was very publicly announced very quickly, and then so all of that, the timing of it, is that, in your opinion, evidence of pressure, undue pressure, or evidence of due process being followed at pace? Yes, and you're in a high pressure environment all the time in your role.
The short timescale created the pressure, as I said earlier. In terms of the parts that the FCDO and I was responsible for, I mentioned conflict of interest or vetting, and other decisions. I'm very confident they were taken, albeit under pressure, properly. As I've already been clear, the number 10 decision to announce in advance of DV was unusual.
And final one from me, with the benefit of hindsight and many months to look at this and think about this whole process, where did the process go wrong? Was it at that early stage of even considering him, or was it the due diligence, or was it the vetting? Where did the process go wrong in your view?
I don't have complete knowledge or insight into the process prior to the Prime Minister's decision, so I can't answer that question.
You told us that it's the normal process to do vetting and then announcement. So for comparison purposes, when it came to the appointment of Jonathan Powell, was he vetted and then announced?
I wasn't involved in his appointment.
Oh, he's not Foreign Office.
It's a National Security
National
Advisor, it's a
Security
Cabinet Office
Advisor.
role.
What about when he was Special Envoy for the British Indian Ocean Territories?
Envoys are different and are dealt with differently. I honestly can't remember the secrecy on that, so you'd need to ask the department.
Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sir Philip. You talked about the short timescale causing problems. Do you think there was a reasonable diplomatic reason why Number 10 wanted the appointment done by Trump's inauguration?
Look, I think once the Prime Minister's decided they want a change of very high-profile ambassador, you don't want to wait too long. You want to get on with making that change. I mean, my own view wasn't essential for Mandelson to be there by the time of the inauguration. Always takes a while for US governments to form because of the confirmation process. It's actually quite quick in Trump 2 compared to Trump 1, but it does take weeks. So I was personally much less concerned and didn't see that as an absolutely essential thing. And of course, you know, Karen Pierce was willing to stay longer and be flexible within reason, and be well respected and connected to the Trump transition team. So yes, I can see entirely the point of getting on with it. I wasn't quite convinced that we had to see the 20th of January as a deadline, but that was the one we'd been set, you know, very clearly, you know, and communicated by the top of the government.
Did you say that to Number 10?
To be honest, I think, but yeah, I would have been clear that we didn't have to, but I think in the end they were getting with it. It's also true that in the end, Lord Mandelson didn't go until after the inauguration.
Any other external appointments, including political appointments, but others, are there examples where somebody has started in post before they've received their DV and then had access to those materials?
I'm not aware of an ambassador starting in post, certainly externally, without DV. I mean, I can't speak for history, if you know what I mean, but in recent times, no.
And do you think the argument that because Lord Mandelson was a Privy Councillor, he wouldn't need DV clearance was credible at all?
As I said, my initial reaction was that it was odd and insufficient. So no, which is why I asked for advice. But you know, but we did also pretty quickly settle on he needed DV.
And you said higher classifications of material that he wouldn't have access to. What level of classification before he received his DV was Mandelson able to access?
I think it's in the letter, but I think it was up to secret, you know, 0.5 page, whatever it is. It's in there. So up to secret was allowed.
So there were no briefings he was given above that level of classification before he received vetting?
Not that I'm aware of.
Did the intelligence agencies ever share any concerns with you about Mandelson's appointment or his access to information?
No.
Thank you. Knowing what you know now about Peter Mandelson's relationship with Epstein and everything else, do you think the DV process made or UKSV made the correct decision and the FCDO made the correct decision?
I'm not aware of any of the substance of the DV process. I genuinely can't answer that question.
Does it change your view on the appropriateness of political appointments to ambassadorial positions at all?
I mean, this one self-evidently hasn't worked out, but you know, Lord Llewellyn was a brilliant ambassador to Paris and then Rome, and George Hollenbury did a good job in Cuba, and the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary are absolutely entitled, and it's explicitly allowed for in the legislation, to make political appointments. So I don't have any objection. I mean, clearly, when I was head of the diplomatic service, I was head of the diplomatic profession, and inevitably you kind of, you know, you're not quite chief. You're head of the tribe, even if you're not chief trade unionist. So, you know, within reason, they're a good idea. But yeah, personally, as a diplomat, I would argue that a vast majority of jobs should go to diplomats, but they have been successfully used in the past.
Okay. And finally, do you think the Prime Minister's statement that full due process was followed is a fair description of what happened in Mandelson's case?
I'm going to dodge. I'm really sorry, but I just actually don't think it's for me to sit here it's not for me to, it's for others, including, all of you as members of Parliament to come to a view on that.
So as your permanent secretary, would you have said in another case?
Okay, let me, I'm not going to answer your question. Let me describe what I've said to you, in my mind to you today. So as I said, I think the processes, the FCDO, the bit I was responsible for, followed up until I stepped down on Sunday the 19th of January. That was proper process, done at pace as we were asked. It was unusual, and I wasn't involved in this, I was involved but not responsible. It was unusual for the announcement to be made before he received DV.
Thanks.
I've got a question from Edward and from Afra, so let me go to Edward first.
I think it sort of follows on from what Alex was asking you, Philip. You're requesting to see the due diligence report. You're flagging to the Foreign Secretary that you have concerns. So Ollie, in his evidence, told us that this was the only time in which the Security Department requested to see him in respect to whether or not to grant clearance. You've told us that during your tenure, there was no situation in which you'd met with the Security Department regarding granting clearance. Is there any precedence for this number of red flags to be raised on an appointment?
I think that's really an impossible, I'm sort of tempted to I don't know, that's a really an impossible question for me to answer. If you're talking about, no, it is, because any appointments,
You want me to narrow it down?
Previous governments of different political persuasions over time have made, shall I say, not the smartest appointments in a whole different areas. But if you ask me, if I reframe your question as around an appointment to an ambassadorial role during my tenure, then the answer is yes. Or no, rather. I mean, not as many, whichever agrees with the thrust of your question, but that's yes or no.
Okay. All right.
Good answer.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a very quick follow-up question to one of the ones that Alex talked about to do with the types and levels of classified information that Peter Mandelson saw prior to going out to the US. Would you have expected the ambassador to the US to be briefed on and to know what was in the China audit?
So I'd left, unfortunately, before the China audit had been completed. So I'm slightly hamstrung by knowing the absolute classification of that and quite how it, because some of the things about our China policy obviously are very, very highly classified. So I'm not ducking, but I don't really know, because it may be actually there was, and it also, remember, it wasn't complete at that point. It wasn't completed before I left. So my guess, what I'm guessing, but my guess is on China, Lord Mandelson would have been told a fair amount, but there would have been some things which were a higher classification that he wouldn't have been able to know until later. But I'm surmising rather than knowing, and to be honest with you.
I mean, so I completely understand that. You said you're guessing that, but were you aware that it was expected that briefings would include some information about the work that was being undertaken as part of the China audit?
I would have expected him to have been briefed on the evolution of the government's policy on China, so that he was ready to talk to the US administration about the UK government's policy on China, i.e. doing his job. And that must have included, therefore, him being briefed on where the government's audit of China policy had got to, if that answers your question. So you said basically yes.
Thank you. Alan and then Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Sir Philip, was the correct process followed in the dismissal of Ollie Robbins?
Save the easy questions for last. Look, I don't think I can answer that question, and it's clearly going to be a matter of, or may become a matter of formal legal dispute. I guess what I can say is when I was Permanent Under Secretary, there were a number of very serious disciplinary cases during my time leading to dismissal, and they all involved some process. But only the Prime Minister, Sir Ollie, and those involved know what happened, and I don't. So I can't answer your question.
But in your cases, you would probably see someone suspended and an investigation taking place, or something as summarily dismissal as we've seen.
In a serious gross misconduct case in the FCDO, so for an FCDO member of staff, however serious, in my time, it was going to suspension and at least one case removal from post for overseas ambassador, and then a very short period to do a formal process.
Thank you. I want to ask about the due diligence report, but does anyone else want to come in on?
Uma wants to come in on the back of that,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, then we'll go
Sure.
back to you.
Thanks,
again.
Chair.
Question, Sir Philip, on the judgment about the reasons for why Sir Ollie left his post. Would you have informed Number 10 or the Prime Minister of the concerns about Peter Mandelson and those leaked emails and the emails released by the US Department of Justice after the decision to sack Mandelson? If the view from the civil service is that you don't inform your principal before, surely after, when all this information's in the public domain, would you have intervened?
I don't think I can answer that question for the reason I sort of gave earlier about not being in the moment. I mean, I recognise the Prime Minister clearly believes genuinely he should have been told. So Ollie set out for you his view, including, if I understood him right, that he felt he was bound by the rules not to discuss the information from the vetting process, although that's now disputed, and you had different evidence from Cat and Little. So, and I personally think it's a very good thing that someone as Adrian Fulford's stature has been asked to look into this, because we can't be in this damaging situation again. But I'm afraid I just actually can't answer your question, but we do need a proper look at this because it is very damaging.
I'd agree, Chair, if you can let me ask one final question. This is a hugely significant decision, this appointment. It had national and international repercussions as well as reputational risk. There's a well-publicised friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, and the FCDO and the civil services view time and time again has been that they can't intervene because the rules don't let them intervene, or to take a passive approach. Do you think, given everything we know, the system should be changed going forward?
I don't know the answer to that question. Which is why I'm pleased that Adrian Fulford, who I know from his time when he was, I think, the first head of the investigation, he was the first investigatory powers commissioner, and also, if I remember right, may still do, has been the final appeal for vetting processes, so cases, so clearly knows a lot about it. I think he is the right person to get actually at that question. It's definitely right to look at it.
Back to Anne.
Thanks. In the follow-up to her evidence to the committee, Cat Little confirmed there was no Cabinet Office advice ahead of the decision that Morgan McSweeney and Matthew Doyle should follow up questions with Peter Mandelson about Epstein. Have you any views on whether you thought they were the right people to do that, or whether someone independent of the process or someone trained in vetting would have been better to follow up?
It wasn't part of the vetting. It wasn't part of
the due diligence process.
Yeah, no. What do I think about that? Look, it was a political appointment with a process being run out of Number 10 and a due diligence conducted by the centre in a way that I've already said is not part of normal civil service practices. So I think in the end, who is doing the questioning and whether that's appropriate comes down to who and what weight is being put on those questions and who answers them. And so in a sense, I just actually genuinely don't know, because it wasn't me making the decision. I wasn't involved in it. It wasn't therefore for me to kind of say, well, that's good enough or not good enough as the conduit for the questions. I wasn't being asked or ever involved in putting any faith in that conduit.
Thank you, Chair.
Right. And then John.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, we've gone around this issue of due diligence, vetting over and over again. I am surprised that you have never seen a DV report, but is that correct?
The only papers I saw on DV was in my formal role as the Permanent Secretary in signing off the outcomes of appeals. So someone being refused has the right to appeal, and those papers would come to me, but they did not include vetting files. Aside from those appeal papers and the forms I filled out for my own vetting, I've never seen vetting papers.
And so that would align with what Sir Ollie has told us
Yes.
about having only an oral briefing, where we now have him and Ian Collard telling us that this was
Yes.
a borderline case.
Yeah. Although, just to repeat what I said earlier, a case was never escalated to me in that way.
And then what this committee has been led to believe, I think, that red flags and denials of clearance were part of this. So I'm just, the bit I think you can help us with is the process through which Ollie Robbins finds himself sacked, because you've been following this as closely as anybody else. I mean, just to phrase the question differently, do you understand why Sir Ollie Robbins has been sacked?
I have not seen the letter he was sent, so I cannot, and I don't speak for him, and neither do I speak for the government. So I can't sit here today and say I know. And I know also that Ollie was very clear in his evidence to you in basically saying he wasn't going to talk about that.
But in the end, the FCDO is a make recommendation department because it takes responsibility for passing clearance. It has the power to manage risks and to mitigate those risks. And that is the process that all of the evidence that we've seen shows us has happened, which also aligns with what the Prime Minister has said, that due process was followed.
That sounds right to me. And I read carefully last night the letter the Foreign Office sent to you, and I wasn't directly involved in anything after the 19th of January, but it rang true.
Okay, John, and then Fleur's going to ask the last question.
You'll be aware that a number of former very senior civil servants have spoken about how damaging this episode has been on the civil service. As a former very experienced Permanent Secretary and head of the diplomatic service, what is your assessment of how this has affected the civil service and in particular the diplomatic service?
I mean, Sir John, thank you for that question, because I think I'm glad you asked it. It's a very important one. I think it's also important to remember the kind of wider context. Look, the British system of government works best when civil servants and ministers, including at the highest level, work together effectively to deliver the elected government of the day's programme, but respecting they've got slightly different jobs and roles and responsibilities. And whenever that isn't happening, and that isn't happening effectively, then you're not able to deliver as well. So I do think a situation, and you need to have load-bearing relationships at the most senior levels as well. So I do think there's a challenge now, and I think it's incumbent on all of us, including people no longer in government who can perhaps help from the sidelines, to try and get back to a situation where the government of the day and the leaderships of the government of the day and the civil service of the day have trusting relationships, understanding they've both got different pressures on them, different roles under pressure and slightly different roles, but need to work together as a team to deliver for the country.
And the trusting relationship at present, do you think, is broken down?
I don't like sort of black and white terminology like broken down. I do think self-evidently that there are now challenges, at least for some people in the relationships.
Not least people who think they're in charge of their departments, who understand that their permanent secretaries have been told not to tell them things.
I've got one more question, one more piece of the puzzle, which is about going back to access talks that you held with what were then shadow ministers before the election. Did the issue of political appointments, the appointment of the ambassador to the US, or appointing Peter Mandelson come up in access talks? Would they have been recorded?
Yeah, if you're asking to say were there records of if your question is were there records of access talks, the answer is yes.
Okay.
If your question is
And
were these aspects recorded, I'm really sorry, but I can't actually remember the rules. But at the time, there was an absolute omerta around the contents of the access talks. I'm going to be cautious, even though I'm no longer a civil servant, because I'm still bound by the rules about. So I'm reasonably confident actually the content of the access talks is rightly not something I can say to the committee, I'm afraid, but yes, they were recorded.
Good, thank you very much. Order. Now, if we can logistically, if Sir Philip is allowed to leave first, and then The Foreign Affairs Committee are continuing their inquiry into the workings of the Foreign Office and the appointment of Peter Mandelson in particular. And we have just had a break, but we are now continuing our session with Morgan McSweeney. Thank you very much for coming. I understand, could you just introduce who you are? And I understand that there's a brief statement that you want to make before we ask you some questions.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Morgan McSweeney. I was a former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Keir Starmer from October 2024 till February of this year. Chair, thank you for inviting me to appear before this committee today. I hope to assist you in your work as fully as I can. Before addressing the specific matters before you, I'm grateful that you've allowed me to say something briefly. First, I want to say something about the victims and survivors connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Too often, discussions of public figures and appointments can lose sight of the human suffering at the centre of these matters. Women and girls were abused, exploited and scarred. They deserve protection then, and they deserve to be remembered now. I'm sorry for any part this controversy has played in causing further hurt or distress. I've spent much of my working life trying, in whatever role I held, to make this country fairer, stronger and more successful. I've always believed public service is a privilege. It brings responsibility and scrutiny, but it also brings a meaningful chance to improve people's lives. That is what motivated me in government. The appointment of Mandelson as ambassador was a serious error of judgment. I advised the Prime Minister in support of that appointment, and I was wrong to do so. As I said in my resignation statement, I resigned because I believe responsibility should rest with those who make serious mistakes. Accountability in public life cannot apply only when it is convenient. The Prime Minister relied on my advice, and I got it wrong. It is also important, however, to distinguish between what I did do and what I did not do. What I did do was make a recommendation based on my judgment that Mandelson's experience, relationships and political skills could serve the national interest in Washington at an important moment. That judgment was a mistake. What I did not do was oversee national security vetting, ask officials to ignore procedures, request that steps should be skipped, or communicate explicitly or implicitly that checks should be cleared at all costs. I would never have considered that acceptable. These processes are in place to protect our national security. Finally, I want to place on record my respect for those who serve our country through public institutions, MPs, ministers, civil servants, diplomats, security professionals, and many others whose work is demanding, often unseen. In the Cabinet Office, the Foreign Office, and 10 Downing Street, there will be many people working long hours now to understand what happened here and to ensure lessons are learned. They deserve fairness and respect as they do that work. Chair, I'm here to assist the committee in its work. I made a serious mistake in recommending Mandelson's appointment. I accept the consequences and hope today I can help the committee to establish the facts and to make sure the right lessons are learned.
Thank you. So why was it necessary to replace Karen Pierce at all?
So should I set out the timetable of my understanding of the various different decision making? So
And I'm going to do that,
Okay,
but I
okay,
just
sorry.
wondered if I could just start with, how did it even become an issue?
So my understanding is that before we were in government, the civil service were deciding who to appoint Karen Pierce when her term came to an end, and that in the access talks with Simon Case, Simon Case was informed that the Prime Minister was minded to make a political appointment in the role of ambassador. So that predates my time as a Chief of Staff. At the time, I was working in opposition and I wasn't working as part of the transition team. When I came in as Chief of Staff, I understood that to be the general direction the Prime Minister wanted to go, and that a formal decision was made not until after the US presidential elections, because he rightly wanted to wait until after seeing who was elected US president on the 5th of November.
So is there a note of the discussion around whether or not it should be a political appointment, or are you saying that it was something that had already been decided before Labour got into government?
So Well, I only found out this weekend as I was trying to piece together the full picture, and I called Simon Case to ask him what his recollection was, and his recollection was that January, February 2024, when he was inquiring about what Labour might want to do with the US ambassador, as they were considering who to replace Karen Pierce with, he was told the Prime Minister was minded to make a political appointment. As far as I know, then the next decision was taken in early November. So the decision by the Prime Minister was formally taken in early November after the US presidential election. So I've seen a box note that went from the Prime Minister's private office, his foreign policy private office, and his PPS, and which asked him explicitly would he like to go ahead with a political appointment or make a civil service appointment. I don't recall any conversation about that. And then the next thing is that he is requesting who could potentially fill that post.
That's the box note of the 11th of November, which is on page 2 of the humble address materials, and it's a PS note to the Prime Minister.
Yes,
it talks about that the current ambassador to Washington has been making good inroads with the Trump team, and then talks about on timing of appointment and announcement. Talking about what the options are essentially.
Yeah. And I didn't input into that box note.
No. And neither did anybody else, it looks like. I mean, when it comes to the Prime Minister's comments on it or the outer office comments, there wasn't anything on that.
No, I don't think there was any input from any of the SPADs into that. It was just a straightforward, what would you like to do, Prime Minister? But there wasn't a recommendation.
There was a list of candidates, David Miliband, Cathy Ashdown, Peter Mandelson, even George Osborne were the sort of names that, according to The Guardian and the Tom Baldwin's book, were the sort of candidates that were being considered at the time. Is that right?
Those sound like the right names to me. I think that I don't recall there being much discussion ahead of the US presidential election. I think the Prime Minister wanted to rightly wait to see the outcome of that. I think if Kamala Harris had won that US presidential election, I don't think that Peter Mandelson would have necessarily been appointed, and he probably wouldn't have been. I think the Prime Minister started to seriously consider names after the US election.
Just so that we get the timeline right, you became head of office on the 6th of October.
Yes.
You really wanted Peter Mandelson to be the ambassador, didn't you?
I thought he was the right choice after the US presidential election. The reason why I thought he was the right choice is because Britain was exposed, the UK was exposed after Brexit. We left the European Union without any US trade deal. And for me, honestly, this was the top priority of the Prime Minister, was to get a US trade deal with the Americans. And I thought that based on Mandelson's experience as an EU Trade Commissioner, that made him the strongest candidate. But like everybody else, I made clear to the Prime Minister there was pros and cons, and there was risks. I don't think the Prime Minister would have chosen Mandelson if Kamala Harris had been elected president. I think he considered about who would be the right fit for the White House, and we procured him a short list of 2 strong candidates at that point.
I'll come on to that in a minute. But I mean, you wanted. I mean, it was more than that. It was personal as well, wasn't it? I mean, he was your mentor, particularly when you became Chief of Staff, because you had no experience of the weird and wonderful world of Whitehall, but obviously Peter Mandelson did. So didn't he become an indispensable and venerated confidant for you?
He was a confidant for me, but I don't confidant. Beg pardon. But I didn't regard him as my mentor. I first had a conversation with Peter Mandelson in 2017. I don't think I really started to go to him for advice until about 2021, and I was 44 years of age then. So I didn't regard him at all as a mentor. I got advice from him, and it was useful. But I also had other people around who were perhaps a bit more shy with the media, who I sought to for advice. We brought in some extremely experienced people from the Blair administration. So Liz Lloyd came into our team, Jonathan Powell came into our team, and I would certainly ask both of those for advice about how things work as well. So I asked a range of people for advice and help. I don't regard Mandelson as ever being a mentor, but certainly as an advisor.
So, I mean, when the New Statesman says that Morgan wouldn't breathe without consulting Peter Mandelson first, that's not fair.
yeah, you forgive me if I don't believe everything that's written about me in the papers, but I don't think that was true. He was somebody who I sought for advice, but both when I was campaign director and as chief of staff, I built a wide network of people who had done jobs similar to mine in the past, going back decades in the Labour Party.
And I will go into. I mean, I really wanted to just sort of start with. I mean, you began by working for Excalibur, didn't you? Which was run by Peter Mandelson. It was an attack and rebuttal unit, basically, in '97, and you worked on that. And one of the things was to also do work on Labour MPs who might be perceived as disloyal.
So again, Chair, I'm glad that I can correct some of the records on this, because this is all a bit of a mythos here.
This comes from the Independent.
Yes. So I was an intern at the Labour Party in the 2001 general election. I was an intern. I was assigned to the attack and rebuttal team.
So you didn't work in '97 for Excalibur?
No, I did.
So 2001 was your first time.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
And my job. And I hate to dispel the myth to maybe some people from different political parties about what Excalibur was, but all I did was glue bits of newspaper to A4 paper and scan it into a machine.
Mm-hmm.
It was.
We've all done it.
Literally that. That was as sophisticated as my job got. The team wasn't run by Mandelson. The team was run by Spencer Livermore,
right.
And it included lots of future Labour politicians and SPADs. I never met or spoke to Mandelson in that election, and I didn't even report into who is now Lord Livermore. It was much more junior people that I reported into.
And then what I wanted to ask you about was about the accounts in the I paper on the 4th of February 26, that Mandelson was helping to vet candidates, that he was given access to a secret Google spreadsheet of potential candidates, and that there was an off-the-books exercise. It's quite a lot of detail in the article about it, which tends to give at least an aura of authenticity to such reports.
Mandelson had nothing to do with the selection or the vetting of any of our parliamentary candidates. I don't know what Google Doc the I is referring to. I'm pretty sure it wasn't a party document. I don't think that we kept.
No, I think it's an off-the-books exercise. I think that's the point.
Well, but it had nothing to do with me or the party. I was in a senior role in the party at the time. We did everything on the books. There might have been other people compiling their own lists, but his role had no official impact on the selection of our candidates. Our vetting was done by a team inside HQ, and it was all to do with. It wasn't to do with political vetting. It was to do with inappropriate things they might have said or done prior to becoming candidates. And it was an NEC process to determine the suitability of potential parliamentary candidates. But Mandelson was not involved in the selection of our candidates.
And there was a strategy document called Labour for the Country, which was written, I believe, after the Hartlepool by-election defeat. And is it right that Peter Mandelson had a big input into that? I mean, it's your document, but that he was involved in that too.
So I wrote that document in February 2021, ahead of the local elections to the Prime Minister, because I believe there was challenges the party was facing that it needed to address. And I think Hartlepool showed the scale of the political challenge we had if we wanted to win the next general election. And I certainly asked Mandelson for input into that document, but it was my document. The argument was mine, but I also sent it to half the shadow cabinet. I also sent it to other colleagues, all the senior staff, or most of the senior staff in Lotto at the time. I sent it to, and a document like that where I'm trying to gather my own thoughts, I might send it to 10, 15 people to say, can you give me a view? People from all across the party. But like I said earlier about Mandelson, most of the people who I would go to for advice were much shyer with the media. So you could quite easily put 15 contributors towards a document like that. But it was my document, and it was my argument that I wanted to make to the leader of the party at the time about the direction I thought we needed to take.
After Angela Rayner resigned, and when there was the reshuffle on the 5th of September 2025, it's claimed that Peter Mandelson masterminded the reshuffle. In fact, there's a quote, this is not normal. He was US ambassador. Why was he masterminding the reshuffle? This is reported in the Daily Mail. Patrick Maguire says that on the day of the reshuffle, Peter Mandelson was in number 10 and wouldn't leave. And according to the New Statesman, just before his sacking, Mandelson had been in number 10 to advise on the first cabinet reshuffle.
Again, I'm very pleased I get the chance to correct the record on this. Mandelson was in the Cabinet Office and then understood came into number 10 on the day of the reshuffle, but he was not involved in the reshuffle. The reshuffle was extremely challenging because it was a bad day for our party, for the government. We had just lost the Deputy Prime Minister, and we needed to reorganise the government at pace, and the Prime Minister wanted to go ahead and do that. The text messages from Mandelson to me on the day, I believe, will be made available at the humble address. I can't remember precisely what he said, but he texted me his thoughts, and I have to say, on a reshuffle day, I get texted a lot of thoughts from a lot of people. The people who I would respond to and get back to would be cabinet members or other senior staff to ask them their views. I did not respond to any of Mandelson's texts. The text messages set out ideas of people that he thought should be in particular positions. None of his suggestions actually came out to be the case, so his ideas were not followed up. I don't mind getting ideas, but I didn't have a conversation with him about his ideas. He asked me to see me. I don't think I actually bumped into him. I may have done, but I definitely didn't discuss the reshuffle with him. The only text back from me to him is at the end of the day, where I said, look, I thought we did well considering the circumstances today, but I did not take him up on his offers of advice, and I did not act on any of the advice that he gave, and I did not ask him his views on any ministerial appointments.
And so are any of your text messages to Peter Mandelson or not going to be available in the humble address?
Yes.
And why is he texting you if you're both at number 10 on the same day?
Because he's not in the room.
And you didn't bump into him?
I might have bumped into him. I don't recall, but I certainly didn't ask him his views. And at the point that he texted me, so the way, and this was my only government reshuffle, there is a big gap between the Prime Minister taking a decision and then the media hearing about it, because we go through a number of processes, especially we have to go to the palace before it's announced publicly to ask the King's permission. So by the time we get to the afternoon, all of the work is done and you're making phone calls, and where the staff move on to is the next day. People text me. I don't like, and they're entitled to do so. I mean, it will be backbench MPs, it'll be ministers, staff members, ex-staff members, journalists, and they will all text me their ideas. Everyone has an idea of how to make.
This is the American. This is the ambassador to the United States of America. He's in number 10 on the day of a reshuffle. I mean, it does look odd. At the very least, will you accept that?
It wasn't a planned reshuffle. If we had all hoped the day before that the former Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner would get cleared and that we wouldn't have had to do a reshuffle. That was our hope. Had Laurie Magnus gone another way, we wouldn't have had a reshuffle at all. So Mandelson wouldn't have been able to just arrive out of thin air. He happened to be in the Cabinet Office that day, and I don't know why he walked into number 10, but in the room which we were organising the reshuffle, there was the Prime Minister, there was the Chief Whip, I think, came in once he had been appointed new, or maybe he was there the next day, and then there was a handful of his senior staff. Mandelson was not in the room. The Prime Minister did not seek his advice, but as Chief of Staff, on a reshuffle day, and it was true in opposition, I get a lot of text messages from people, and most of them I don't even read. I'll pay attention to the ones I get from cabinet members or from senior staff with their ideas, and most of the rest of them I just filter out, and at the end of the day I go back to them and say thanks for your input. I don't know why he did it, but people do it.
All right, well, let's go back to the appointment of him as ambassador. So there were a number of problems before he could become ambassador to the United States. I mean, the first being that he wanted to be Chancellor of Oxford and Ambassador at the same time. So, I mean, he said on a podcast, the Times pod on the 12th of the 11th, 24, that he thought that he could do both jobs. Now, is it right that you asked for official advice on whether or not the role of Ambassador to the United States could be part-time?
I don't recall, but I don't recall that I asked if it could be part-time.
So I'm relying in particular on an article in The Observer on the 4th of February 26. Morgan McSweeney sought official advice over whether Peter Mandelson, who resigned from the Lords this week in disgrace, could be the UK ambassador to the US and Chancellor of the University of Oxford at the same time, sources have claimed.
I don't have any recollection of it.
And officials had to explain that being His Majesty's ambassador in Washington was a full-time job in Washington.
So I do remember thinking that at the time, that it was a full-time job. I understood that. So, like I said, at the time that he was doing that, I think that had Kamala Harris won the US presidential elections, I don't think he would have gotten the job. He was certainly lobbying for the job. He did, but I think that Oxford University shows he was also hedging because he didn't know whether he was going to get it or didn't think he was going to get it. So he was also looking at other opportunities. He did say to me when he was saying to me that he was interested in the job, that he was also going for Oxford University. And my view to him was these are incompatible. I don't see how you could do both. So
if you're telling him that it's incompatible, then you wouldn't be asking for official advice on whether he could do it part-time.
I don't think I would have, but I can't say for certain. And if
why wouldn't you remember something like that? I mean, it is pretty
I can't
interesting.
I can't remember doing so. So I think you're right. I would have I'd remember it if I would have, but I can't remember ever doing so.
Okay. I mean, one of the other problems was that Keir didn't like him. I mean, again, for the New Statesman, Keir doesn't even like him and never really has. He's not Keir's sort of person. And the Foreign Office definitely didn't like him, as far as we can tell. And then, of course, there's all the red flags. So all of these things are problems, getting in the way of Peter Mandelson becoming ambassador. But you still wanted him to be ambassador, right?
At the time in Downing Street, there was conversations about who could be the best candidate, and names were considered, and most people were making pros and cons arguments. I have to say, I know that a lot of people now say they told the Prime Minister they were against it at the time. Everything I know about how the Prime Minister works is he will consult widely, he will take a lot of views on, and if everybody else was opposed to this appointment but me, he would not have made an appointment such as that. He does like to try to build consensus within his team and to get a wide range of views, and he doesn't just listen to one person on it. He certainly spoke to other ministers, other senior staff, and took his time reaching the decision that he reached.
Can I suggest something to you? That you wanted him to be ambassador, and so what you did was you bided your time for the first 6 weeks after your appointment of head of office, and then you went for it. I mean, as Jonathan Powell has said, it was weirdly rushed. I don't think it was rushed at all. What I would suggest is that it was part of a strategy. It's used in warfare, it's used in boxing, it's used in political campaigns. You go fast and you go hard and you confuse your opponents and you get what you want. You appreciate that. I mean, you are an expert in strategy. I mean, that is a strategy that is used sometimes.
That wasn't any strategy that I deployed. When I came in as Chief of Staff, we had big challenges in Downing Street. We had to reset Downing Street. We had a new PPS. One of my priorities was hiring more senior staff into the building because I thought we didn't have enough experience. We had a budget coming up. Most of my time at that time was completely immersed in the budget because I think from my recollection, we were close to OBR deadlines. These were the kind of things that I was most concerned about, not who the ambassador was. When there wasn't detailed discussions that I remember ahead of the election because we were waiting to see who was going to be elected.
So Trump is elected on the 5th of November.
Yeah.
And what I would suggest is that on the 27th of November, when Mandelson has not been elected as Chancellor for Oxford, it was at that point that matters began. and that so you had between the 27th of November and the 4th of December when the due diligence started. So it's very quickly after Mandelson is available as a candidate, we're doing due diligence. And we did due diligence not just for Peter Mandelson, but for another candidate at least as well. Is that
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And then we've got in between the 4th of December of due diligence being done and the 11th of December. And on the 11th of December, according to one of the box notes that we've seen, Mandelson's now the leading candidate. So what happened between the 4th of December and the 11th of December for Mandelson to become the lead candidate? What happened in early December?
So I would disagree a little bit with the sequence of events. Before a consideration was given to who should be the political appointment, the first thing that had to happen was the Prime Minister himself had to decide, did he want a political appointment or did he want to go ahead with a civil service appointment? I didn't write into that box note. I think
Neither did the Prime Minister.
well, I can't speak for what he wrote and didn't wrote. I can speak.
You're in charge of his office. There's no note at any stage of, as far as we understand it, unless something, we're about to get something, of the Prime Minister making a decision that he wanted to have a political appointment. There's no note of that, or the thought process in relation to that. And then there's no note, oh, actually, I've now thought about it, I want Peter Mandelson. There's no note from the Prime Minister on that either.
So if I take each one of these decisions separately,
Yeah.
the first decision he had to make was, did he want a political appointment or not?
Mm.
And I didn't write into that note that I thought that there should be a political appointment. He would have made his decision, and he would have told his PPS what he wanted to do, and then his PPS said, now we need to procure candidates. So he could have gone in a different direction at that point, and that would have been the end of it, and we'd have gone ahead with appointing a civil servant as ambassador. So he could have gone in a different direction. I didn't have any strong disagreements with anyone in number 10 that I can recall. Like everyone else, I could see there was pros and cons in the appointment, and I worried that it would go wrong. So I didn't try to push anything through. We procured two strong candidates for him. One was Mandelson, and the other was George Osborne, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, who I'd met as part of it. And my view was that we had, and I said to the Prime Minister, you have two appointable candidates. Others agreed that there was two appointable candidates. I can't recall anyone saying that Mandelson was not appointable.
So what happened in early December was that you went to the United States and you went with Jonathan Powell. And as far as I understand it, when you were in the United States, you were given a clear message from the Trump team that actually they weren't keen on Peter Mandelson and that they wanted to have Karen Pierce hanging on. So, I mean, did you tell the Prime Minister that? And is there a note of you telling the Prime Minister that?
So it's half right. So
This is Politico, the 20th of the 3rd, 26th.
They didn't talk to me about Mandelson. They made clear that Karen Pierce was doing a wonderful job, and that they would be content with her remaining in post. But I did, as part of the process, talk to Foreign Office officials that I knew, who also approached me directly as well. I spoke to people that I knew in the US system, and I got a wide range of views, and quite a lot of views were coming back in support of Mandelson as a candidate. As I said, if the Prime Minister was hearing overwhelmingly against Mandelson, he might have made another decision. But he was getting a lot of views at the time. He was listening to people. He does listen to his senior staff. He does listen to his ministers before reaching a decision. So I think if it was just me arguing for it, I don't think he'd have made that appointment.
So we've got that, and we've also, of course, got all the stuff that's come out of the due diligence. And on the box note that I've been referring to on the 11th of the 12th, it says, Chief of Staff has discussed candidates with you, with the lead candidate being Peter Mandelson. So here he is, he's now a lead candidate. So how did you manage to persuade the Prime Minister that he should be the lead candidate, given what you'd heard in America and given what was in the due diligence?
So what I'd heard in America is mixed views. There were some people I spoke to there that
You've told us that.
that said that Mandelson was a strong candidate. My view is that he was the lead candidate because of his experience as an EU Trade Commissioner, and the political skills that I thought he could bring to the table.
No, because it's not your opinion that's important. It's the Chief of Staff has discussed candidates with you, with the lead candidate being Peter Mandelson. I mean, this is supposed to be the Prime Minister's decision, not your decision.
Yes. It's a Prime Minister's decision.
And the Chief of Staff has discussed Peter's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, which we will go through with you, but your Director of Communications is satisfied with his responses to questions about contact. Do you think it's appropriate when doing due diligence for you as a friend of Peter Mandelson to speak to the Prime Minister and for his responses to be measured by another friend of Peter Mandelson, Matthew Doyle? And for that information to be put before the Prime Minister as a basis upon which they can make a decision?
So I agree, and I think that when I look back on it, I certainly think it would have been much better if I'd asked Pet to ask those follow-up questions. I guess my thinking at the time was I'd put follow-up questions to him in writing, and that if a senior member of staff did that he would feel more obligated to give the truth and the full truth. I didn't feel that I got that back from him. But it wasn't my decision. It was the Prime Minister's decision, and he saw the DV as part of that decision.
And so between the 11th of December, when Mandelson's the lead candidate, and writing to the King and telling the King that, advising the King that this should be the candidate, what happens? Is there a decision made at that point that Peter Mandelson should be the ambassador? And where is the note to show that the decision was made and how the decision was made?
So I tried to get the times as best as I possibly could and dates, but you have to forgive me a bit because I don't have access to my number 10 diary or the Prime Minister's diary. So if I make a mistake, it's not intentional.
No, it's fine.
So I'll try to give you as best as I can. So I think three things worth saying. The Prime Minister will be talking to people at that time, saying, what do you think? Everyone will be giving him pros and cons. That's for sure. He will take a view based on a rounded view. Then the last meeting I recall where he said, this is the direction I want to go in, was with an independent Jonathan Powell and me and him. And then after that, and it might have been the same day or the day before, is when an independent wrote to Philip Barton to say the Prime Minister would like to make a political decision. So that was the last meeting that he had. And in that meeting, he would have conducted that meeting the way he always does, which is to make sure everyone in the room has their view. And then
what date did you say this was? I missed it.
This would have been either on the day or the day before, or a few days before an independent wrote officially to Philip Barton. So when an independent wrote to Philip Barton to say, can we begin the necessary arrangements and get Mandelson in place?
We're talking like 15th, 16th,
something
18th,
about that.
17th, 18th.
Yeah. So he would have had a meeting then. He would have said, right, what are we going to do here? Let me get your views.
Okay.
And then he'd have said, we're going to go with Mandelson.
Okay. During those 7 days, was there an agreement between the Prime Minister, between you, that what you should do is tell the King, tell the incoming President, announce the fanfare, but all of it always knowing that it would depend on his vetting? And would it be whether it was so during when this meeting was happening? Is it like, well, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, but obviously it's all dependent on vetting?
So I wasn't involved in any decisions about when to tell the King. I'm not aware of those processes or when the appropriate time to talk to the King or communicate with the King about all of this. I don't think that we discussed that at the time, and I know Simon Case's letter has come out subsequently. I didn't see Simon Case's letter at the time, or I don't recall seeing it. I think it was directly to the Prime Minister rather than to me.
But it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, you can't appoint somebody, let alone Peter Mandelson, without vetting him first.
So it didn't jump out as a problem to me at the time.
Even after the due diligence?
Even after the due diligence. And the reason why it didn't jump out to me, we had around about the same time, again, I can't remember the dates, around about the same time, we made a political appointment for National Security Advisor in Jonathan Powell. And as far as I remember, we appointed him, and then we began the DV. I was appointed before I began the DV work, and that's what tends to happen. If he had then failed, then we wouldn't have sent him to DC. So it didn't occur to me to ask, because that's how I saw the practices being put in place. I think the Prime Minister is right in saying that that shouldn't happen, and I think that he's now made a decision that won't happen again in the future. But there has
As a
been...
strategy man, don't you think it's a bit odd? Let's at least look at it this way. It's a bit odd to, I mean, essentially, what you've done is you've briefed the press, you've told the King, you've told the incoming president, he started being paid, he's got his pass, you know, all of these sort of things have happened, and then you do the due diligence. So at that point, due diligence had said, no, sorry, really too risky, can't do this, you know, and he'd imagine the storm.
Sorry, no, due diligence had been done. DV.
Sorry.
DV.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
So yeah, it would have been very embarrassing for us. But can I just play an alternative kind of scenario? So at the time, it didn't jump out to me as a problem. We appointed, as I said, I got appointed before I completed all my necessary work. Jonathan Powell got appointed too before the necessary work. If Mandelson's DV had been a problem, it would have been an embarrassment for us. It would have been a much bigger problem for him. But there's an alternative scenario, which is that we had, say, we're going to do DV before we talk to the palace or before we talk to the US administration. The chances of, unfortunately, the chances in government of there being a leak anyway would have been a problem. Either way, if your lead candidate fails DV, it is embarrassing, but it's far preferable to pull that candidate at that point than to go any further. If that happens to your candidate and your candidate blows up and you have to pull them out, that's what happens. It's embarrassing to us. It would have been worse for him. But at the time, nobody said to me, hang on, before you announce anything at all, make sure that we do this DV first. Of course, if somebody had, I wouldn't have questioned it. I would have, but
at the time, the agenda was that he is offered the job on the 20th, and he's supposed to be in Washington on the 20th of January. So that's just a month. And during that month, there's Christmas and there's New Year. I mean, all I'm suggesting is that this was part of a deliberate strategy to push this as fast as it could be in order to ensure that people could not raise any objections in the circumstances, because there simply wasn't time.
No, I don't agree with that at all. If there was problems with his DV, would have pulled them. If we'd been told that he couldn't get the necessary security clearance, I've no doubt the Prime Minister would have pulled them. I mean, in the event, the Foreign Office couldn't complete the work until after the inauguration, but the timetable was being set by the US political calendar. We wanted to wait until after the US presidential election to work out who the candidate should be, and we did want the candidate in place by the inauguration. But it wasn't a big deal that he wasn't in place by the inauguration. He was in place, I think it was about 2-3 weeks later.
This is my last question. So do you think that when the chance came for you to give Peter Mandelson his last job, you stopped thinking about what was best for the government? Really, you stopped thinking about what was best for the country. And you just thought, I want to give this job, this great job, to one of my heroes. And it became an obsession. And it may be that the Prime Minister can be criticised for giving you this leeway, but it was a leeway that you abused. And you stopped thinking strategically. You closed your eyes to the risks. You didn't consult the necessary people, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary. You railroaded this through as fast as you could before anyone could realise what had hit them.
I don't think that's true. I certainly spoke to the Foreign Secretary a number of times. I have then Foreign Secretary. I have a very good relationship with the Deputy Prime Minister. I've known him for very, very many years. And I would certainly have spoken to him extensively at the time. I don't regard Mandelson as a hero. I think that's an exaggeration of the kind of relationship that I had with him. In every advice that I gave to the Prime Minister, hand on heart, I thought I was operating with a motive in the national interest. In politics, you over decades, you know a lot of people. I've had to, in 20 years in politics, I've had to fire friends from jobs. I've had to turn people down who were desperate for jobs, who were closer friends of mine than Mandelson's, who really wanted jobs in number 10, or people who thought they were going to be ministers, because I've always tried to operate in national interest. The amount of times I've had friends come in and see me or phone me who were really angry at me because they didn't get the job that they wanted to get. That's what politics is. You have to try and always operate in the national interests. Of course, you know people, and then you make judgments that in this case turned out to be wrong, incorrectly. I completely accept that, but it was absolutely, this was not some heroes trying to get a job for. I thought that his skills as an EU commissioner would help us to get the trade deal that I think the country needed, because we were very, very exposed after Brexit, and getting that trade deal right was very important. I thought he had the skills to do it. I made the wrong judgment. I completely accept that, but my motive was always in the national interest.
Afri, you want to do a follow-up, and then I'm going to Sir John. Is that right?
I had a few follow-ups.
Oh, well, I'll go to Sir John first, and then I'll go to you, if that's all right.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just be clear? The Prime Minister had decided that he wished to make a political appointment. Was it you who first said, Prime Minister, I've got the perfect candidate, Peter Mandelson?
I think the first person who put Mandelson's name forward was Mandelson.
Directly to Prime Minister, I want the job? Or
I think he talked, I don't know if he spoke to him. I think he talked to a lot of people, making it clear that he was interested in the job, including, I'm sure, possibly even members of the press. But yeah, that's where that came from. I don't remember the Prime Minister asking me a view prior to the US election. I think, but I can't remember, but I think he was keeping his cards close to his chest, waiting to see the outcome of that election. And I think there would have been, for a Labour administration, a broader range of candidates available to him had the Democrats won that election.
You've set out why you think he was well qualified to do the job, but you've also known him for a very long time, and you will also be fully aware of the fact that he had twice had to resign from the cabinet, that he had business interests with China, that he had a close friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, and also that he was friends with Oleg Deripaska, who was a confidant of Vladimir Putin. Despite all those things, you still thought he was the right person for the job?
Well, to take each one of those in turn, he, after his last resignation, he had rebuilt a reasonable reputation for himself. He had gone as an EU commissioner, and as far as I was aware at the time of his appointment, and I don't know what will subsequently come of their own investigations, but he had a good reputation. He was seen to have done a good job as EU commissioner. Then he came back into British politics and served as a very senior member of Gordon Brown's premiership, Gordon Brown's government, and again at the time was well regarded as a senior minister in that department. So he had done these two big political jobs long after his last resignation. It's why I think that a lot of the media and a lot of other politicians at the time thought that this was the right appointment for the country. The nature of the relationship that I understood he had with Epstein was not a close friendship. How I understood it at the time was a passing acquaintance that he regretted having, and that he apologized for. What has emerged since then was way, way, way worse than I had expected at the time. And it was when I saw the pictures, when I saw the Bloomberg questions in September 2025, I have to say it was like a knife through my soul. I did not expect that level of connection that he was talking about there. As for the other issues that you're raising, I thought business interests would be dealt with in the Foreign Office. So people look at things like conflict of interests. When we appointed SPADs who have business interests, Cabinet Office and PET would deal with that. So that wouldn't be something I would deal with as a Chief of Staff. And if there was any national security issues whatsoever, then my assumption on that was that would be dealt with by DV. And if there was any national security issues whatsoever, we would then be told if there was a problem, and then the Prime Minister could pull the appointment. So from what I knew at the time, I thought he had re-established himself as a credible political, senior political figure in Europe and in the Brown government. I did not was aware of the extent of the relationship that he had, and I thought that these other issues would be dealt with at other parts of the process.
Your discovery of the closeness of his relationship, you say, was a knife to the heart. But the box note says that you discussed with Peter Mandelson his relationship with Epstein, and that you then discovered as a result of that conversation, for instance, the fact that he stayed in the flat belonging to Jeffrey Epstein after Epstein had been convicted for paedophile offences.
That wasn't a discovery that I made.
So did you advise the Prime Minister of that?
No, that was in the DV form that was from
DV.
So no, beg pardon, you're right. A due diligence form from PET. I wrote to Mandelson after the DD to understand from him in writing what his position was on these issues. That email that I sent to Mandelson and his responses from that, the Met Police are using as part of their investigation. When I was in number 10, I was told that we couldn't share either the questions or the answers to those questions or the email itself with the media or as part of the humble address process until the police were finished with it, because they said it would interfere with their investigation. And so I've stuck to that since I've left Downing Street too.
But in your conversation with the Prime Minister about Peter Mandelson's relationship with Epstein, the subject of Mandelson staying in Epstein's flat after the conviction, that was part of the conversation.
It's hard to answer that directly without saying what was in the contents of the emails. But my understanding at the time, which I could maybe say about what my understanding was from hearing him talk about it and listening to his friends. My understanding at the time was that his relationship was a passing acquaintance that he knew through somebody else, that he's the way of he's describing it was that he realized that it was a mistake. He deeply regretted it. He broke it off many years before. He wasn't advocating for the guy or defending the guy in any way. And you take all of these things into consideration. What then emerged as the relationship in September last year was not the relationship that I was led to understand. It was very different.
Can I ask about the two notes that went to the Prime Minister from the private office about the appointment? In each case, they'd been released under the humble address process. They are completely blank other than the submission. There is no comment. The Prime Minister has not indicated any view. Now, I've worked in Downing Street and box notes go up and they come back down with a comment. It may only be a tick, but there is something to indicate that the Prime Minister has taken a decision. In this case, there is nothing to indicate that the Prime Minister has taken a decision. Why not?
I can't answer the question. So the box notes usually come back into the civil service, and then I get informed what the decision is. He may, and sometimes he did do it verbally, but I can't answer why there wasn't anything in the box. So I would make submissions into the box the same as the other special advisors. They would be collated by his PPS, then they would go to the Prime Minister, and then the Prime Minister would send it back through the system. I didn't ask to see the box note. I would sometimes ask to see a box note if I was unsure what the decision was, or if I wanted to understand a bit more about his thinking. But generally speaking, I just took whatever the civil service said. But I don't know why he didn't tick. Maybe he spoke to his team.
Well, that's the alternative, that he didn't indicate in writing. He said, I would like to have a meeting to discuss this. But if such a meeting took place, there would be a record of it. And there is no record that has been released.
Again, I can't answer as to why that was. I wasn't the person who was keeping records. but in terms of his decisions, I would always make sure in any decision, including any of this, that the PPS would always be present to be able to give reviews and to make sure decisions were properly recorded. But I wasn't the minute taker. I wasn't.
So how did you discover that the Prime Minister had decided to go ahead with Peter Mandelson?
I believe that, from my best recollection, that there was a meeting in mid-December, and he told us that that's what he wanted to do.